What is up, everybody? I am joined by Mr. Ryan Muckenhern and Mr. Paul Neese, two of the best outdoorsmen I know today, and we're going to talk about something I'm personally, and I think we all are very excited about, and that is custom turrets. Yes.
Custom turrets.
Or custom turrets. I affectionately like to call them custom turrets.
Yeah. You do turn it. It's
there
in the name.
you go. You turn it to turret.
Yeah. Man, a fast, efficient, essentially way to dial in your ballistic solution to your scope to execute a long-range shot. These things have been around for a while. I think we've all used them in varying capacities.
Long time. I think they went back into the Vietnam War, weren't they? First kind of.
If we get into like the Leatherwood Camputer rifle scope, I think probably more than anything, their initial adoption was military.
I would guess so. I think probably just a spin of tape, and then guys would mark spots on tape is probably the origination of it. Yeah.
And, I mean, really, we just have a fancier way of doing it. Some guys are still doing turret tapes these days.
You can indeed.
I just sure like the clean look of an etched custom turret, though. It's just it brightens my day. The one, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it here. It's on a Nosler 21. Old Eric Barber just greased a real nice black bear up in Alaska with this exact setup. This is it.
Yes,
it did the job.
In fact,
guys, what are the Paul, maybe we'll start with you. What do you find to be like what are the benefits of a custom turret?
To me, it really comes down to one thing, and that's speed. It is speedy. It's very fast. It's very simple. I mean, you're looking at a long range shot. You simply need to know a distance, and then you dial the turret to it. There's very little thinking involved to it, and typically they really shine when it's a very high intensity situation. Maybe there's just a few seconds to get a shot off. You just can't think about a lot of ballistic stuff. In a turret, the ballistic stuff is all baked into it. It's all been done in advance. As we'll talk about here in a little bit, there are some limitations to turrets. I mean, they're sort of locked into a band of temperature and pressures. But generally, they work pretty darn well in most hunting situations.
Right.
It's not you're not going for ultra fine accuracy that you might in some sort of a match shooting scenario. They work. They're in the real world. They work darn well. They really do.
They're a practical solution. And I guess for folks who may not be as familiar with what we're talking about, a scope like this is one of our new Viper HDs, where it's got an exposed elevation turret. So it's a pop up and down locking turret, purpose built to dial your elevation to compensate for bullet drop at extended distances. Now, when you buy this scope from Vortex, the turret that it comes with will be marked in like mil or MOA based increments. These custom turrets that we're talking about are yardage marked.
Very different numbers, right? Those numbers that you see are referring exactly to yards. So as Ryan had mentioned earlier, this one is done in 50-yard increments, and it's a single turn of numbers. In this particular case, the ballistics and the load will get it out a little over 1,000 yards. That max range will vary depending on what the cartridge is and the various conditions that the turret's been cut for. Mm-hmm. But yeah, those are not MOAs or MRADs; those are yards now.
So I mean, if it said if your rangefinder read 600 yards, you would dial the turret to 6. Yeah.
And a nice thing that those numbers, their slope will affect those numbers, but of course, almost all modern rangefinders now you're getting slope correction in the rangefinder. So that's something that the shooter really, as long as you have a slope corrected rangefinder, you can kind of discount that. The rangefinder is going to give you a yardage number that'll correspond to what you dial on a turret. Mm-hmm. So again, very, very simple and quick, just not a lot to think about.
Ryan, what types of data does a person enter in, and maybe we can talk about where they enter this data into as well. Maybe walk us through building a custom turret with Vortex.
Sure. So if you hop on our website, we're going to have a tab under rifle scopes that says custom turret. You click on that, we're going to drive you to our custom turret order page, and there's some particulars that we do need, namely ballistic information to include the projectile, the mass of the projectile, ballistic coefficient, the type of projectile. We've left some provisions for custom in there as well. This is something I think is notable because today's day and age, I'm seeing more and more bullet companies pop up, and I'm also seeing some homebrew folks that have a lathe at home and are making their own projectiles. So if you do that, you can get a custom turret for it. We'll need muzzle velocity if I didn't already specify that. Some environmental conditions, temperature, average altitude that you're going to be hunting at. And these are averages, right? So Paul had alluded to earlier that environmental conditions like temperature and pressure are going to affect the turret, not its performance, but its, shall we say, like accuracy, right? So if you hunt, or like I'm from Minnesota and now I live in Wisconsin, we're at a very similar elevation band. Here at Vortex, we're at 1,164 feet altitude when I'm on the 100-yard range. If I go hunt Wyoming at 7,000 feet elevation, there's a large disparity there. The range temperature is 64 degrees constant, and in Wyoming I could be at 9 degrees, I could be at 89 degrees. Just depending on what time of year I'm at or what I'm doing there, I'll need to pick an average for that so that turret is set up appropriately. As Paul said, they work in kind of bands, if you will. We'll need some mechanical information too. So the particular rifle scope that you're running, and then its adjustment style, so MOA or MRAD, and then the optic, the height, like the center line of the optic relative to the center line of the bore, and then your zero distance. From there, we can take that information, we're going to run it through the ballistics calculator, and we're going to come up with your data package. And then we've got some fancy behind-the-scenes stuff that extrapolates that onto the turret itself. Push the button, the machine makes it, and there we have it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. At least at press time, custom turrets are going to be available for which rifle scopes?
LHTs.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the 3 to 15 by 42, both MOA and MRAD. The 3 to 15 by 50, which is an MRAD only model. The 4.5 to 22, both MOA and MRAD. And then the Viper HDs with exposed turrets. So
like this one we have right here.
Yep, the 3 to 15 and the 5 to 25 models with exposed turrets.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, with those scopes, too, if a person goes to their local retailer, purchases one, or wherever they get their new Razor HD LHT or Viper HD with the exposed elevation turret, they're gonna get a
free turret?
like a code for a free turret.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, we're pretty jazzed about that. And I think something that we're especially excited about, and like Paul had alluded to, there's custom turrets out there. One thing that we're very crazy about is best bang for your buck, customer service, and value. When these come through, we're eyes on them. My team and I are going through and we're manually checking the data to make sure that there's accurate, or that it is accurate. There's no major discrepancies. If I see a turret come through cut for a 308 Winchester that has a 4,400 foot per second muzzle velocity, I'm gonna assume that
the red flag pops up.
There was probably a miskey in there. We're gonna call you. We're gonna email you. We'll go through your data and make sure that what you're getting is the most accurate reflection of ballistic information that you can have.
And I guess if that is what that person is getting, you might suggest to dial back their load a little bit.
Yeah. You're probably somewhere around 180,000 PSI.
Back it off a little bit. Yeah.
So we're pretty jazzed at the prospect of being able to go through ballistic information for your rifle and make sure that the marriage is perfect with the turret. So, and that is an important thing. If I can add a note to this, if this is something that you're thinking about doing, one of the more contingent tools for success is going to be a chronograph. If you don't have one, and you are thinking about getting a custom turret, ask your buddies, do they have one? The range to shoot at, do they have one? The necessity for accurate muzzle velocity is paramount.
I was going to bring that up too, Ryan. That's really the performance of that turret is really going to depend on the quality of the numbers that the customer supplies to us. And as you're saying, the velocity is one of the key things.
Yes.
And, we know it's probably tempting for guys to pull that number off the box, but that is not going to reflect your actual velocity.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. You can get a lot of numbers off the box. You can get a lot of numbers off the manufacturer website, but the number that you are going to want to get yourself for your rifle and the load that you're pushing through it is your velocity. That
Definitely.
just is absolutely critical.
Yeah, as somebody who does a lot of hand loading and a lot of shooting, so infrequently have I found a factory load that the numbers are, I'll say, remotely close, and by that for me is like plus minus 25 feet per second. Actually, just last week I was on the range with my 280 Ackley with a new factory loading, and it was exactly box posted velocity, and my 20 shot average with my 11.6 foot per second extreme spread. To date, that may have happened one other time.
I was going to say the reason why that's notable is because with the infrequency, something like that would happen.
It's so rare. Yeah. It's so rare. Most guns I see are slow. Most factory, velocity is generated from a test barrel of a given length, and a lot of sporter rifles just aren't that.
Yeah, and we realize that the ammunition companies, of course, they put value, the faster that number is, the better it looks. So they'll sort of skew every parameter to get the fastest velocity number they can.
Yeah.
Where in the real world with a customer's rifle, it's rarely going to match up to that number.
Yeah.
It benefits them to be as complimentary towards that number as possible within reason. No, man, these are cool, man. I'm pumped about it. What would be like some custom turret strategies that you guys might look at doing, I guess, in regard to ideal for the person who wants to extend their effective range and be as fast as they can doing so. If you're hunting the same area, you're like, I hunt this area all the time, right? That turret's going to be just spot on for that. What about people that are traveling, going state to state? You're like Minnesota to Wyoming to Idaho to whatever.
For me personally, I would say the same place or region is a great starting point. I think about the spot I hunt in Wyoming. I've hunted that at negative temperatures, and I've hunted that at positive 90. Same weekend opener for the past since 2010. And so I've had knee-deep snow, and I've had 90 degrees. And that is challenging. Not that that's the norm. Like, I'm not usually seeing 100+ degree temperature swings, but it can happen. I would say if you're in an area that has fairly stable weather pattern, and then you're in the same terrain, you're not going
elevation would be the big factor.
Yeah, you're not going plus minus thousands of feet in elevation change. It's perfect. A really good example here is, Mark, you and I were on a deer hunt last year locally, and shall we say I misread the instructions and thought, it's a Wisconsin deer hunt. What am I going to have? A 200-yard shot? Well, the stand that I was on, safely 900 yards is what I could have operated to. And actually,
a long shot for Wisconsin.
I know it.
Oh yeah.
and actually, like, a lot of the agricultural land around here, where you might have a wood lot, or you might have even an ag plot that's surrounded by a stand of woods, that wouldn't be out of the question. Like hundreds of yards.
Oh, absolutely.
And Wisconsin deer openers late November, it's typically cold, and maybe plus minus 25 degrees, and it's like on the south side of cold. So I guess the north side, because it would be colder. But a spot like that where you have a fairly static weather environment and a very static elevation environment, that's where that turret is going to have the highest degree of accuracy potential. If you're somebody who does travel a lot, and these hunts and these places that you're going on, either you're familiar with them or you can get familiar with the terrain feature that you're going to be into, you may consider getting more than one turret. And so Eric, for example, where he was hunting, interestingly enough, tumultuous area, but fairly static weather, right? His elevation wasn't going to change much. He's fairly close to sea level. I think he was maybe up to 2,000 feet. Mm-hmm. And then his weather pattern was predictable for this time of year. We had a high degree of confidence in cutting this turret for that weather condition, and it worked out swimmingly. In fact, it was almost identical to our weather here when he had the turret cut. So when we went to the range to validate everything and make sure he was buttoned up, it was like right on the money. But if you are a person who lives in a Midwestern state or lives in Florida and you're going on a high altitude, Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep hunt, or, some other high altitude critter hunt, do your research into the weather pattern, the elevation, ahead of time. Don't cut that turret for Florida and then bring it to, Idaho at high altitude or British Columbia at high altitude, because they'll fall out of sync pretty quick. And so it is very important that you've got that buttoned up. And again, I can't stress the velocity part enough either. That's really important as well, in order to make sure that that's squared away. From a functionality standpoint too, as far as strategy is concerned, so we're going to give you 1 revolution of adjustment of data correction for that custom turret. And what that means is, so in the case of Eric's rifle scope here, this Viper HD 3-15, he has what's called a 10 mil turret. Mm-hmm. So 1 revolution will net him 10 mils of adjustment. He'll have ballistic compensation to 10 mils value. If you're shooting an LHT, which has a lower density turret, you'll have 6 mils of adjustment. And if you're pumping the brakes, you're like, whoa, that's not a ton. Actually, when you think about it, it, depending on your cartridge, can be a tremendous amount. Eric's particular rifle, this load data, his weather pattern that he had to cut for, gets him to a little over 1,000 yards. And that's a long ways. On most of my rifles, whether equipped with an LHT or a Viper HD like this, we'll just pick on the LHT because it has a lower density turret. 6 mils gets me to about the point that my bullets fail to open and deploy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so likelihood is I'm not moving that distance anyway. And for most cartridges, even the slow poke 308 that Mark, you like to poke fun at, it's bringing me to at or even beyond what my terminal window allows. And so we thought it was a safe bet that if we're putting a custom turret that falls into some fairly specific parameters, exceeding that distance is just potentially, narrowing the margin of error or
mm-hmm.
widening rather.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, rarely does that, for a hunting scenario, most of these turrets are going to get you out to certainly an ethical distance and beyond it. And, it's good to point out that while this makes it look very easy, a guy can simply, you range a distance, you dial out, you have a long shot out here to, maybe 700 yards. That's doing the math for you in the bullet drop very, very accurately. Yep. If the numbers were all put in as we discussed, I mean, that is going to calculate the bullet drop very well. But the catch that this does not compensate for is wind drift left to right. And the further out you get on these numbers, the more and more that becomes very difficult to accurately estimate. So, yeah, I think, it's a good point, Ryan. It's essentially a big game hunting tool. Mm-hmm. And so there's sort of an ethical limit in there somewhere where you want to make a clean shot and you don't want to be wounding animals.
I'm glad you pointed that out, Paul, because I was just about to say the same thing. Like, for an application standpoint, this, a custom yardage-marked turret is for, your big game hunter looking to increase their effective range, in a fast and efficient and simple manner.
Right. Yeah. And, none of that changes if we're looking at a regular turret, like the out-of-the-box solution, like all the same things that we just talked about apply. Mm-hmm. So we're just relocating your data from a dope card that you carry in your pocket or you tape to your stock or you keep on your phone to the top of the turret. All the other math is still there and present, and the risks are still there and present with the standard turret. This is a convenience thing for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, and from your more traditional rangefinder, right? Now we're matching yards in your rangefinder to yards on the turret. So you're marrying those two things up.
Absolutely. A couple of guns that I think this is going to be especially useful on are cartridges like straight wall guns. And I know that might seem a little counterintuitive, like why would we dial a straight wall cartridge? Well, the cartridges in the rifles themselves are capable of extraordinary accuracy, as Mark and I have tested, and at actually surprising distances. Like 300 yards is not out of the question for something like a 450 Bushmaster or 400
That's
Legend.
wild to think about.
I know. And if you hunt one of those states that like mandates that you use that kind of cartridge, chances are you're in a big ag land anyway. So I think of like Iowa or Indiana, Ohio. Now Illinois is a straight wall state. This is like a really, really good marriage, I think.
I hadn't. I definitely thought about it on like your more traditional like big game center fires in ag land, Midwest type stuff where we're located. I've talked about this a couple times lately on different podcasts, but I think increasing your effective range by putting in the work with good data is something that does get overlooked in these regions.
Yeah.
And even more so when you get to those straight wall cartridges, like you said, Ryan, that have maybe a little bit more of a rainbow-like trajectory.
Yeah, that's exactly. I was looking how to describe that too, and you talk about that and the sort of that rainbow trajectory. Well, that's sort of the equivalent of some of these higher performance cartridges shooting out to 800, 900, 1,000 yards or more. So yeah, it's a good point. And hand in hand with that, the higher performance muzzle loaders make great candidates for this sort of thing because they would have sort of similar, relatively looping trajectories that need lots of compensation.
Yeah, the more you'd have to adjust for, the more appealing that this becomes, contingent that we're in that elevation band and weather box that we need to be in for it.
Right.
But yeah, if you think about, like a 450 Bushmaster, while it's wildly effective at surprising distances, it drops like a rock. And if you are going to manipulate a turret, it's a lot of manipulation. It's easy to get lost. And especially if you've got a buck last light and he's working that field edge and you've got a finite window of time to pick range, consult data, and execute shot. Now it's just pick range, dial turret, execute shot. There's no like reading the chart and going over to it.
Oh, no, I've missed opportunities in the past.
Sure.
Looking at my dope chart, and then generally it's like on some smaller format piece of paper. So then I'm like, I looked at the right line, right? And so then I double check, and it's like, it doesn't matter now. He's gone.
I highlight every other line on my data cards.
That information would have been helpful.
I've done that for you, I think.
In that same scenario, Mark, here, and I look at it as a guy who normally need reading glasses to look at fine text. So these numbers are nice big fonts on here, so they make it easier to read. And there are many times where I try to use a ballistic program, dial to the factory MOA or MRAD numbers. Those fonts are smaller on there,
interesting.
and this is easier to read. So it's a plus that way too. Again, coming back to speed and simplicity to use it.
Another note on mechanisms here. So this turret is actually the same turret that would come on your rifle scope normally out of the box. It's just when we start it, it's blank, so there's no text engraving on it. None of the mechanical attributes of the rifle scope change whatsoever. So in the case of the Viper HT and the Razor LHT, they've got the rev stop, zero stop system, identical. It's the same turret. It's just different markings on it. So your core mechanical functionality is completely expressed the whole way through. None of that gets modified.
You're essentially and it's very easy to do, replacing this outer sleeve, or the original with your yardage-marked turret, which if you wanted to pull this off and put that other one back on, you can do that too. So you can swap back and forth between the original, your yardage-marked turret, or multiple yardage-marked turrets.
Yep, correct. And so just looking at the turret now and thinking about other questions that folks might have, the starting point on your turret is going to be your determined zero distance as you relate to us. So on Eric's rifle, he's zeroed at 100 yards. So if you look at his turret, for those of you watching on YouTube, his starting point is 100. And if you had a zero distance of 175, it would say 175 there. 250 is what it would say there. And then plus 50 yard increments the whole way through. We're setting it for now at 50-yard increments.
Okay.
And the reason that we landed on that is we looked at a ton of ballistic data, kind of in a vacuum, but just to look at how things differ, how things are the same, et cetera. And once you start getting to a finer degree of resolution on your yardage increments, your turret becomes impossible to read.
Okay, a little cluttery.
Yeah, big time.
Smaller fonts.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then if you push it out to a very low degree of resolution, let's say every 100 or 150 yard, now there's ambiguity there. And we're not really doing you much of a service necessarily because you've got this huge gap in the middle that you're going to have to kind of guess. So we figured 50-yard increments, modern center fires, or smokeless muzzleloader, or even for that matter, modern inline muzzleloader. This will be a very, very useful tool for you in that respect. It's going to be intuitive, easy, and more importantly, you can find the number, read the number, hit the number. But everything else about the rifle scope remains the same, or the turret, I should say, remains the same. So you don't give up zero stop. You don't give up the ability to re-index it easily. It's not a convoluted process to install, uninstall, reconfigure, etc.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Did we miss anything? Forget anything?
I'll touch on one quick thing. We've got in this particular one 100-yard starting point. Now, if someone were living at sea level, you buy this turret, you install it, you might be worried that if you're going to zero at 100, it's going to change it when you jump up to 8,000 or whatever for your Alcon. The effect on a 100-yard zero is very, very slight, if any. So you're fine to zero the rifle at home at that 100-yard zero, even though your hunting altitude is going to be different and the turret is cut for that high altitude. As someone who's been in the hunting and guiding business for a long time now, I would always encourage a guy to recheck that zero once you've gone to your ultimate destination, if at all possible. It's just a wise precaution. Travel, airplanes, cars, trucks, all kinds of stuff that, it's not a bad idea to check there. But if you zero at 100 at your sea level home, you're going to be extremely close. It probably will change not at all.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's a notable thing in the geoballistics calculator. You might notice we don't have a zero condition field. And that was based on a lot of research on the impacts of 100 versus even a 200, which I'm a big fan of, is a 200-yard zero from a hunter's perspective. And basically what Paul's getting at is that bullet is not in the air for a long enough distance or a long enough time to be detrimentally or negatively affected by atmospheric or elevation changes. That's a very safe zero distance, especially in this context. Also, I think I mentioned that we'll be looking over the data as it comes in to make sure we don't see any egregious discrepancies that are going to result in you having a turret that's not up to your expectations. If you're hung on something, and you're like, well, I just I don't know how to crack this egg, or I don't know what the best way to do it is, or the best solutions to be looking at, call us. We have the ability to mock up the turret. We can and look at what it's going to turn out as before we even push the button on it. The guys can get a turret cut on the phone for you. So it's going to be hopefully as seamless a situation as possible.
One last little point, throw in quickly too. If I personally would not go about having sending your numbers in for a turret until you have a load that the rifle is shooting well. So if you can't group well with the rifle, there's no point doing a custom turret for it. So that's almost your first step. And if you're using factory ammo, you may end up trying several different loads to find something that shoots well. If you hand load, of course, you can probably solve that problem. But don't do a turret until the rifle is shooting a nice tight group.
Yeah, and if you're using that rifle for a variety of applications, make sure not only is the rifle shooting good, but that's the bullet that you want to shoot.
That too.
Those varying critters at. If you're like, well, I like to shoot this bullet for deer and this one for elk and this one for bears, it's like you might be likely be better off picking the bullet that's going to work really well and shoots well for all of those things, because this is for a this is a custom turret. The word custom is in it.
It is matched to a particular load of ammunition
that you're pushing through that rifle.
Yeah, so in Eric's case, 180 grain Nosler AccuBond. If he changed to, a 175 Barnes, null and void.
Correct.
We
start
go to
over.
A completely different turret.
Start over.
Yeah.
Yep. I killed a Coos deer with a custom turret one time.
Did you?
525 yards.
My goodness.
Got him.
Yeah.
It was awesome. Worked really well. It really was so simple. My buddy Ranger said dial 525. I dialed 525. That was a many years ago, different turret. So I guess that must have been cut in. Anyway, whatever. That's what it was.
Groovy.
So, all right. So yes, takeaways: custom turrets can and are awesome and very effective.
Yep.
Good data in, good data
results out.
Yep.
And then we have a little bit of a safety in place. We got some data watchdogs on our hands, Ryan and your team, that are there to spot anything if it potentially looks out of place.
Yeah.
And then if a person has a question, just give us a shout.
Yeah, and again, this is what we do day in, day out. So if you're even remotely apprehensive about this and with respect to any part of it, call us. We'll certainly talk you through, the risks and the rewards to running it, and the guys are happy to weigh in and guide you the right direction.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
And then, like I said before, get yourself a Razor HDL HT or one of these Vipers with the exposed elevation turret, and then you don't even gotta. You just get one.
Yes.
I mean, you got to, input your numbers, but then you get one.
That's easy. It'll take you about 5 minutes if you got all your data.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks,
all
everybody,
right.
for listening.
Thanks, everybody.
Hopefully you're as excited about these custom turrets as we are, and happy hunting shooting.
Yeah, it's a fun tool.
They are. Catch you on the next one.
See ya.